Welcome back to another episode of Dueker Sports. I'm your host, Dylan Dueker. I'm joined, as always, by the reliable Christian Lunday. And we had a lot of fun last week duking it out. So we're going to come back. We're going to do it again this week. We kind of looked at a few things. We were discussing some topics to go over with you guys. And then we decided, why not just do it again? Because it's the NFL offseason. There's a lot of things happening given free agency and the upcoming draft. So we decided just to go ahead and do it one more time. So we're going to discuss some of the hottest topics we think are happening right now around the NFL. And we're going to duke it out. We're going to give our opinions, and they probably won't always be the same, and that's okay. But let's go ahead and get started with our first question of the day.
All right, Dylan. Is Lamar Jackson being undervalued?
So this was a question that I had just on my mind. And when I have questions, I text them to Christian and I say, maybe we should talk about this. So it's surprising to me that nobody has shown interest in Lamar Jackson. So the Ravens will have to offer or match any offer that they give Lamar Jackson, and nobody's given him one. So I wonder how much of this is Lamar Jackson. There's obviously always the stigma surrounding African American quarterbacks. I think that's especially after this past season. I'm hoping that we're getting to the point where we can lay that to rest, considering the fact we just had two black quarterbacks start in the Super Bowl, which is pretty awesome. Two of our favorite quarterbacks on this here show. I know that. But Lamar Jackson, it's tough for me. Yes and no, because number one, the guy's a former MVP. You got Derek Carr getting $37.5 million per year. And right now Lamar Jackson will make $32.4 million on the franchise tag right now. But right before the show began, I looked up to see the contract that he turned down by his own admission, and it was $44.3 million per year over 3 years, fully guaranteed. The averages on that contract would make him the sixth highest paid quarterback in the National Football League, one place ahead of Josh Allen, but his contract is fully guaranteed, which only one other quarterback can say that. That's Deshaun Watson. He wants Deshaun Watson money. I understand. I think he's better than Deshaun Watson as of right now, for sure. There's no doubt about it. However, with his injury concerns, there's no way he's going to get paid that much money. When you look at the other quarterbacks around the league getting paid, they're not getting paid that much money. If Josh Allen is getting paid what he gets paid, Lamar Jackson can't expect to make that much more than him. I think the original offer by the Ravens, I think it was 3 years, $133 million is what we talked about. That's perfectly fair. I don't know why he would turn that down. He's wanting 4 years. I think it is $200 million fully guaranteed. That's never going to happen from the Ravens. It's never going to happen from anyone else. And I think this was like the Ravens' plan. I honestly do. I think they don't want Lamar to feel that they're the ones undervaluing him. I think they're trying to prove a point that he is overvaluing his own self and situation. And I think by putting it out there and letting the whole market, like anyone can send him an offer right now, and the fact that nobody is pretty telling. So maybe when all of this is done, the Ravens come back. Maybe you can increase it a little more, but I can't imagine you'd want to increase that by much. Maybe keep the same average per year, just make it a 4-year contract. But I don't know what Lamar Jackson's looking for. He's undervalued because he's a former MVP that nobody's even asking about, and he's set to make $32.4 million on the franchise tag. So you got to think that someone would offer him more than that. However, I think he has priced himself out of the market of almost every team in the National Football League. So I'll say yes and no.
Well, I'm going to say no. Lamar is not undervalued. I think today Stephen A. Smith came out and said that he was connected to Lamar Jackson's inner circle, maybe a family member, maybe not. And apparently that family member or inner circle member of Lamar Jackson's said that he never demanded a fully guaranteed contract. I'm gonna call BS. You know why? Because he turned down that $133 million contract. It was fully guaranteed, I'm pretty sure. And it was going to make him the sixth highest paid quarterback at the time, which, like you said, was ahead of Josh Allen. Um, I think he's not undervalued. He's overvalued himself. And I think that owners around the league actually have him valued correctly because they don't want to give another. It was pathetic that they gave Deshaun Watson, the Browns ownership gave Deshaun Watson a fully guaranteed contract, considering everything that's gone on. And I think the league, I don't think he's being blackballed due to race or any other factor other than this is a quarterback who relies on his athleticism. He's really not an excellent passer. He's an okay to good passer, and he's often injured. The past 2 years, he hasn't been fully healthy each of the past 2 years, and he hasn't reached 1,000 yards rushing since 3 seasons ago, I think, actually, when he had over 1,000 yards rushing. So it's like his best attributes are his athletic abilities, and those are perishable skills. So when you're asking for a fully guaranteed contract, I think the owners around the league are like, we don't want another Deshaun Watson situation where a quarterback, Lamar Jackson has no off the field issues, but someone whose gifts, his physical gifts, are uncertain in the not too distant future. Essentially, they all got together, and I think they're saying never again. We're never going to do a fully guaranteed contract ever again. And then I think this is going to be played out into the next collective bargaining agreement. And I think that the owners actually value Lamar correctly. I think he's a very skilled player. His athleticism is breathtaking. When he's on the field, he's a force multiplier. He makes other people better. He makes his offense better. He is the engine that makes the Ravens go. And because of that, I think that they've correctly valued him with we need you to be on the field. We need to incentivize you both in passing statistics and awards, also with rushing, so we can ensure we're getting the most value out of you for the contract we're actually prepared to offer. I think if he was truly not asking for a fully guaranteed contract, he would have been signed already. He would have been signed this offseason instantly. So that's my opinion. No, I don't think Lamar is undervalued. I think that the ownership values him where he probably should be, in my opinion, but he actually, just like you said, overvalues himself and has probably priced himself out of the market.
Yeah, I'm trying to look and find right now to see when is like, is there a deadline with this tag? I don't think there is. I think he has all the way up until the start of the season to sign the franchise tag. But I think we won't see any action on this front probably till after the draft, because I think if a team misses out on a quarterback, like, but I don't think they will, because the number one team that I could see giving him the contract, and that makes the most sense to me, are the Houston Texans. And I don't see that happening because they're in a position to draft an amazing quarterback, probably in the top five. Obviously, year one, I don't think they'll make the impact that Lamar Jackson would year one. But you're talking about they're going to probably get a guy who, in the next 4 years, they pay him pennies
Yep.
compared to what Lamar Jackson's asking for. And on a team that has not a lot to build around, I could see them like not wanting to sign Lamar Jackson either. But the only reason I say yes is because it shocks me that here sits a former MVP. You don't see that very often. MVP quarterbacks hitting the open market like this. And you really don't see them hit the open market with this lack of attention. But yeah, I think a big part of this has got to be Lamar Jackson. Maybe it's time he hires a agent, because I don't think that he understands. I mean, I get it. He thinks he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Maybe he is. I think he's definitely top 10. But he's pricing himself. He wants to get paid like he's a top 5 quarterback and be fully guaranteed, which is worth even more in my opinion. So he's competing to be the highest paid quarterback is kind of how I see it right now. And no. With his health concerns, I would not. So he might want to reevaluate this before it gets even further out of hand. But that's all. We're going to keep following this, but that's all for today. We're going to talk about him. But let's head on to the question number 2.
Question number 2: are the Jets Super Bowl contenders with Aaron Rodgers?
Absolutely. So we're going to talk about this in another segment later on. But if the Jets if and when the Jets, because now they have Alan Lazard, they're going after the guys that Aaron Rodgers put on this list that was released of people he wants, which I did. I want to mention that because I did see a thing. It's like Aaron Rodgers complains year after year that the Packers do not give him the receiving help that he wants. And then he creates a wish list for the New York Jets for him signing there. And it consists of a bunch of Packers receivers. So I'm like, what are you complaining about? Now you want them to follow you? I don't understand. But I think he goes to the Jets. You have Garrett Wilson, who's already better than any receiver he had on the Packers a year ago. You got Elijah Moore. They just got Alan Lazard. You have a strong running game. You have a better offensive line than you had in Green Bay. And the number one thing is the Jets' defense compared to the Packers' defense. Now, the Jets did not force very many turnovers last year. I think they were like 28th in turnovers forced. However, they were fourth in yards allowed and in points allowed, while the Packers were 17th in both. So you look at that, you have a championship defense, in my opinion. I think the turnovers will naturally increase. I think they played that well and they just didn't force turnovers. I don't know if it was a lack of opportunities or what, but I think that number bound to go up. You put Aaron Rodgers on that team, and I think that he's going to regain his MVP form. I think he'll be rejuvenated. I think he'll be fired up, and he'll be excited to be on a team that I think plays with a lot of energy, a lot of physicality, and not. It doesn't remind me of any Packers teams I've ever seen while Aaron Rodgers has been there. The physicality of New York Jets. I think it's because they're. I love Robert Saleh, their head coach. I think he's kind of changed the mindsets there. They're continue to stick with him, despite not a very fortunate beginning to his head coaching career. But they were off to a hot start last year, and to me, it's the physicality. I keep saying that, but that team can play with anybody, and so you do that, and you add a team that started off. I think they were 7-0, maybe even 8-0, and you add an MVP quarterback. He was MVP 2 years ago. I feel like people are already like writing him off that he's done for his career's over. He just won back-to-back MVPs the previous 2 seasons before this one. And the Packers receiving core, probably the worst has been his entire career there this season. It took him a while to adjust to new receivers. The offensive line wasn't great. The defense did not play their middle of the pack pretty much all the way across the board. So, and they still competed for the playoffs all the way until the final week of the season. Add him to the Jets team that started off, they were undefeated for half the season. That team is a definite Super Bowl contender, but I think they'd have to get through the Chiefs. They'd have to get through the Bengals, and then it'd be interesting to see. I think that they would be better than the Bills right now if Aaron Rodgers goes there. But yeah, so I think at best they're probably the third best team. But even at worst, I think they're still a top 5 team in the AFC, and they for sure compete for a Super Bowl.
I agree. Yeah, they're Super Bowl contenders with Aaron Rodgers. They don't have to be the top 2 seeds in the AFC to be considered contenders for the Super Bowl. If you make the playoffs, you're in contention for the Super Bowl. And if you look at how well the Jets played at almost every other position outside of quarterback, it was good enough to make the playoffs and to win a game or two, even make a deep playoff run. So if you just put a competent quarterback behind that offensive line and with those skill position weapons and with that solid defense, you're bound to make some noise. So yeah, definitely. I don't think we need to beat this thing to a bloody pulp. It's definitely yes. Aaron Rodgers makes the Jets Super Bowl contenders, given the talent they have on both sides of the football.
They win 8 games with Zach Wilson, Mike White, Joe Flacco.
Yeah.
Don't tell me Aaron Rodgers doesn't come in there and instantly make them 4 games better at least. You're talking about a 12-5 or 13-4 team, in my opinion, if he goes there. And I know that the Patriots are definitely hoping this does not happen. Because can you imagine the Bills, the Jets with Aaron Rodgers, and the Dolphins coming off the year they just had? The Patriots at that point, you might as well just go into rebuilding mode because you are significantly behind in this
Look,
AFC East race.
You can either keep the Cougar addicted Zach Wilson as your quarterback, or you can put in Mr. Ayahuasca shrooms and 4 nights away in isolation to clear his mind so that he can throw excellent passes later in the season. So I'm going to take Mr. Ayahuasca over Cougar Addiction because I trust that man more. There's a larger resume of success by a long shot.
Well, Zach Wilson was a Cougar in college, and now he hunts them for a living. So you got to respect that. But let's
The
go on to
greatest
question
game.
number 3.
Question 3. Who are the top 5 free agents still left?
This is a tough one for me. You're going to have to bring these up as I go because I struggle with these top 5 lists. There's too many players. There's too many players to narrow it down. But I have what I consider to be the top 5. I'm going to get my other list ready just in case because I know I had honorable mentions. I always have honorable mentions.
Would you like to go down 1 to 5 or 5 to 1?
Let's go 1 to 5.
1 to 5.
Let's give the people what they want right off the bat. Number 1 is Yannick Ngakoue. This guy is an elite pass rusher, and you can't have enough pass rushers. He's had 19 and a half sacks combined in the past 2 years. He's had 8 or more sacks, I'm pretty sure, every year of his career, maybe minus his rookie year. But the guy is an elite pass rusher. He's young. That's the biggest thing. Of the guys who are left on the market, there's not a lot of guys in their early to mid 20s. Here you have a phenomenal pass rusher still just out there waiting. So I think he's definitely my number 1. My number 2 is Bobby Wagner, which we just talked about youth. Now we talk about veteran leadership. Bobby Wagner just showed last year he's still one of the top linebackers in the game. He maybe is not number 1 anymore, but the dude still competes as a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. I think he'll easily be top 10. And he's at the end of his career. A team who's competing for the Super Bowl, who needs linebacker help, maybe the Eagles, because you look at the Eagles losing linebackers left and right, but they have some young guys ready to step up and fill the gaps like Nakobe Dean this year, who I'm excited about. But why not Bobby Wagner to come in and help lead as a veteran presence in the locker room? There are many teams I can see Bobby Wagner going to making a huge impact this year. So he's my number 2. I think not only is the veteran leadership makes him worth it, but his play on the field is still very elite, even though he's 33. My number 3 is Leonard Floyd. So Leonard Floyd has had 9 or more sacks in each of the last 3 years. That is extremely impressive. The guy, I believe, just turned 30. So he's still got some gas left in the tank. I think you bring him in, at least, if nothing else, a pass rush specialist. But he's out there. 9 sacks is a pretty good measurement for the season. He's done it 3 years in a row. So definitely the guy has plenty of ability. So great addition to any team looking for pass rush help. My number 4 is, in fact, Taylor Rapp. So Taylor Rapp, I thought about putting him higher up on the list because he's a 26-year-old safety. He's had, I think, 92 or more tackles in each of the past 2 seasons. He also combined for 6 interceptions. Pro Football Focus gave him, I think, like a 76 grade this year, which is pretty good among safeties. He puts him in the top half of safeties. And I don't know what's happening with the market with him because I think he's a phenomenal safety. The Eagles, I keep saying the Eagles because that's the team I enjoy, but they have a huge hole at safety. And if the price is right, Taylor Rapp has proved to be a very dependable player each of the past 2 seasons, and he's 26 years old. So I'm a little confused why he's still out there. I don't know if he's trying to negotiate a big contract or what's happening here. But NFL.com has him ranked like, I can't remember. It's like in the low 80s among like top 101 free agents. So that kind of surprises me. I would consider him to be much higher than that. And then my number 5, before I get into my honorable mentions, is Odell Beckham Jr. So obviously I'm concerned. The guy's torn his ACL 2 times since 2020. But I don't know if you've been watching these tapes that he keeps releasing. He looks explosive as all get out. And you saw what he did the last time he was healthy playing for the Rams. I think if he does not get hurt in that game against the Bengals in the Super Bowl, they probably blow them out because they were on a tear before he went down. He was the best receiver on – well, that's not true. That was almost blasphemous. He was the second best receiver on that team, but he played phenomenally well. He was a huge factor to get them to the Super Bowl. They missed him severely last year. The guy, he set out all last year. He's had the time to rehab his injury. That's the important factor. And at his age, he needed that. I honestly believe that. It's probably best for his long term ability that he was not signed at the end of the last year like everyone expected him to be. But he looks extremely explosive. So I don't know. I think that he'd be a great addition anywhere. As long as he doesn't fly on any more planes and fall asleep, he should be just fine. But I had an honorable mention number one for sure. I'll just do one here, but it's Marcus Peters. Marcus Peters is one of the most opportunistic corners of this generation. The dude intercepts passes like they're nothing, and he's also coming off of back-to-back injuries, so it's a little bit concerning. But the last time that he started a whole season, I think he had 3 or 4 interceptions, but he still looked phenomenal, and he played sparingly last year due to injuries, but he still looked like an above-average corner, and those are hard to come by. So hopefully, he's had time to get healthy and get right. If so, you're looking at a guy who I think is an above average corner on the open free agent market and one of the best players at tracking the ball and getting interceptions I've seen. Obviously, he's a little aggressive. He blows some coverage to go after the interceptions, but corners and pass rushers are highly coveted. That's why they litter my list. And I think that all of those guys would be great additions to a team, and it's certainly teams competing for a Super Bowl this year.
Nice. If we're gonna count non-exclusive, not exclusively tagged individuals, Lamar Jackson is my number one free agent. Um, he was on pace for 1,000 rushing yards last year before he got injured. He only played 12 games. So I guarantee you, had he played the rest of the season, he would have cracked 1,000 yards rushing. He was on pace for well over 3,000 yards passing. So it would have been another phenomenal season, complete season from him. He's only 26 years old. He's a former MVP. He's got the cachet. Um, there's nothing more I can say. He should be signed by now, but just like we said earlier, he's not. I think that's his own fault. But yeah, he's definitely the top free agent in my opinion. Uh, my number two is Yannick Ngakoue. Just for all the things you said, he's 27. He had 9.5 sacks last season. He's very productive. I think anyone could use him on their defensive line. I think that he's a great pass rusher, and given his age, his production, it's very hard to come by these quality of guys, especially this late into the free agency process. So I think this guy is the second best free agent left on the market right now. My number three is DJ Chark. He's 26 years old. He averaged 16.7 yards per catch last season. He had over 500 yards receiving, but he wasn't utilized that much with the Lions. I think that's because the Lions had absurd depth at the wide receiver position. And then when they started to get later in the season, they started to ease Jameson Williams into the starting lineup. But I think DJ Chark has had some great seasons in Jacksonville, especially. So I think him being still young, still very explosive, is a great option at the wide receiver position who could be on the cheap. And I think he is the, let's see, third best in my opinion. Number four is Odell Beckham Jr. Just echoing what you said, Dylan, to me, he wasn't the best receiver on his team, but he was the best player in the Super Bowl before it went down. I think that if he had played the rest of the game, he would have been Super Bowl MVP. I don't think there would have been any question. I think everyone would have agreed because he was destroying the Bengals secondary. I mean, he was eating them alive. Um, Totally agree with you. His talent is phenomenal. Even when his athleticism starts to leave him more and more, he still has some of the best hands in NFL history. Maybe the best because he just catches everything at absurd angles, and you just don't. He does it in the game, and you just don't see that very often. Yeah, so fourth best free agent right now. I think that most teams are probably going to wait until after the draft for him to be signed. I think he's also asking for quite a bit of money, even though he's 30 years old and his injury history. But my number five is Bobby Wagner. He had 140 combined tackles last season. He almost had 100 solo tackles last season by himself, and he's not 33 yet. He will be 33 here in like 140 days. But so going into next season, he's going to be a 33-year-old. But I know several examples of 33-year-old linebackers who've been very productive. One of them comes to mind is Hall of Famer Ray Lewis. These people, linebackers can age well. And I think Bobby Wagner is one of those people who will age well. And if you put him on your team, just like you said, a Super Bowl contender that needs linebacker help, excellent player to go out and grab. I think you can get him on the cheap, and I still think he's going to be a very, very productive player for you.
Yeah, so the main player I want to talk about on your list is DJ Shark because I don't think he belongs on the list. And I'll tell you why, because it's been 4 years since the guy has had 1,000 receiving yards. He hasn't had more than 5 touchdowns in that time frame either. Uh, like you said, and it was a very good point, he did average 16.7 yards per catch last year. He actually averaged 20 the year before, but he didn't get that many targets. But unless of a team, like I think he'd be an amazing fit for the Rams, number one, probably the Chiefs or the Bills and the Chargers. If he ends up in one of those teams, then yeah, I think he's going to have a phenomenal breakout season playing with one of the top quarterbacks. He gives them an explosive threat. I think the Rams are the perfect fit for him. If he can go there and win the number 2 spot on that roster, they need some explosive play to help Cooper Kupp get open. I think that's a perfect fit. But if he goes anywhere else, I just don't see him. He needs, at this point, I would say, I don't know. I've lost trust in him just because, yeah, it's been 4 years. He had one 1,000-yard season. That was it in his career so far. So I think he has some work to do to regain the trust of me for sure, and for football fans and fantasy managers all over the country.
Well, he didn't even have the year with a developed Trevor Lawrence and an actual competent coach at the helm in Jacksonville. And then when he got over to the Lions, they were already deep at the wide receiver position. So I think he's just got a whole career without a really competent quarterback. I don't think that's his fault. And I think he's displayed enough traits and being young and cheap. I think the upside is there. I would definitely try and pick him up if I was a team.
I've seen him make some pretty nice grabs, even as recently as last year. But I wish him the best of luck. I loved the DJ Shark do. Let's bring that back. Let's bring that back because that was fun. But let's move on to the next question.
All right. 5 players who you think are going to see a fantasy boost this year.
So, speaking of fantasy, it's never too early to start thinking about fantasy, guys. I had a horrific season last year, and absolutely in both the leagues that I'm in. I don't know what happened. The injury play came, and not the league that I'm the commissioner, but my other league, it wiped out almost my entire team. I was without like my top 5 or 6 players for most of the season. Ridiculous. I finished, I'm pretty sure I was in like a 12-team league and a 10-team league, and I'm pretty sure I finished in the bottom 3 or 4 in both leagues. So, and coming off of a year where I had just won the fantasy championship, so I was brought back to humility very quickly. But it's time. It's time we start talking about fantasy, especially post draft. It'll be too late because you guys here at Dueker Sports will already have been way months in advance. We're going to talk about right now. So, guys who are going to get boosts. My number one, we already talked about him. Not him. That was our last thing, but it was
Not him. I think I
unless if you're
uploaded the
doing
wrong
IDPs,
graphic.
and then keep your eyes out for him. Keep your
Yeah.
eyes out. My number one was Aaron Rodgers, as Christian tries to find that
Gotta get our
graphic.
graphics.
But Aaron Rodgers, I think, if he goes, I'm assuming in this instance that he's going to the Jets. If he goes to the Jets, not only will he get the boost, but Aaron Rodgers and company is how I had it listed on our graphic. And that's because Garrett Wilson is one of the best young receivers in the game. He's one of the best receivers. Like, I think he'll have Devontae Adams type numbers if Aaron Rodgers goes there. Brees Hall is one of the better running backs in the league. And if Aaron Rodgers goes there, I think he just opens it up for him as well. So I expect Aaron Rodgers to regain MVP dominance. I think he very well might win it. The land in New York will be flowing with milk and honey when Aaron Rodgers comes to town. I guarantee you, the guy is absolutely phenomenal. I think he has every bit of the capability to regain MVP form, and I want to see this happen because the Jets will be dominant in every aspect of the game if he goes there. But yeah, pick up Aaron Rodgers early in the draft. If we do an auction draft in our league, and I think that you could get him probably cheaper than you would say Mahomes, Josh Allen, given the year he just came off of. But I think he could put up MVP numbers if he goes to the Jets. So that's my number one. My number two, Christian just talked about, is Trevor Lawrence. They added Calvin. They didn't add him in the offseason. They've already added him during the season while he was suspended. He'll have Calvin Ridley. So they'll still have Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram. And basically, they're going to swap out Marvin Jones Jr. for Calvin Ridley. Now, the last time that Ridley played a whole season, Matt Ryan was his quarterback. Matt Ryan threw for 4,581 yards and 26 touchdowns. He was already past his prime. You look at Trevor Lawrence last year, he had 25 touchdowns and just over 4,100 yards. I think he'd be even better than Matt Ryan. I think you're looking at a possible 46, 4,700 yard season. You're talking 30 something touchdowns. Trevor Lawrence easily moves into a top 5 quarterback in the league with Calvin Ridley coming back. If Calvin Ridley's anything close to what he was when he was in Atlanta. Ridley that year, by the way, had 1,300 yards and 9 touchdowns. So I kind of put them together. If Calvin Ridley can stay healthy and still explosive, this offense, the Jaguars, they're no joke. Get ready for one of the Trevor Lawrence will establish himself as a top 5 quarterback, and the Jaguars will establish themselves probably as one of the top offenses in the NFL. My number 3 is, I believe, Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard has been way more explosive than Zeke the last few years. I know that Cowboys fans have seen it. I've seen it. Zeke is gone. Tony Pollard is going to be the bell cow. I think he instantly becomes a top 5 running back in the National Football League. I think he's competing to be the top running back in the league. Cowboys running backs are notorious for going off in fantasy, and I think it'll be no different than Tony Pollard. I think the Cowboys I think they're really about to turn around their season, and I'll mention something else another reason why I think so as an honorable mention. But you knew it was coming. So number 4, let's see, I can't remember who I had make the list at this point. Yeah, Javonte Williams. So Javonte Williams got hurt last year. He came into the year, they were talking about him splitting with Melvin Gordon. Obviously, he was the starter. Like his rookie year, they kind of were 50-50. Last year he came in as a starter. He looked pretty dang good. He didn't look elite to me, but neither did the Broncos in any capacity. I think Sean Payton comes in. He's going to open up that entire offense. Javonte Williams will probably be the biggest beneficiary. I'm thinking Marshawn Lynch in Seattle. Those are the kind of rushing numbers I see him putting up. And Javonte has the ability to receive the ball as well. And I think Sean Payton will probably – I think he'll really simplify the offense. I think that was their issue last year. They did too much. And the receiving core in Denver still, to me, is not that good. So I see Sean Payton leaning on the run game. I don't think he'll have receiving numbers like Alvin Kamara did in New Orleans. But you look what Kamara did under Sean Payton. Javonte Williams is a very physical running back who I think will just absolutely go off next year. So I think he will not be undervalued in drafts, though. I think you're going to have to draft him extremely high. My number 5, I mentioned this weeks ago, Justin Fields. So it helps that Justin Fields can run. We already know that. So he's got that under wraps. I think he could possibly go close to 1,000 yards rushing next year. Then you look at the receiving updates, the upgrades, that they've had this offseason. And I think you're looking. I don't know that they're a top 5 receiving core, but they're definitely much better than they were a year ago. So I think we're going to see Justin Fields once and for all. What has he got? Does he have the ability to be a franchise quarterback? We're going to find out. I think he'll probably be like average passer, but I think we're looking at a guy who will get not quite to where Jalen Hurts was a year ago, but I think not too far behind him either. So I think you're looking at a guy who competes for top 5 quarterback status fantasy wise in the league. And then, as always, I've got honorable mentions. Damian Harris just signed with the Buffalo Bills today. I think he's going to have a season very similar that he had 2 years ago, where he had 900 yards on the ground and 15 touchdowns. I would not be shocked in any capacity to see him do the exact same thing again. So I think look to get him. He may slip in the draft. He hasn't. He's not named the bell cow of that team. The Bills like to do like a running back by committee, so he might be able to sneak in. But have no doubt about this, he will be getting the touchdowns. So I think you look at him, 15 touchdowns. I almost guarantee it. He's going to go off. I think Josh Allen's rushing touchdowns are going to take a hit, which they should, because look how banged up he got last year. So I think they're going to be much more conservative when it comes to pounding him into the end zone, and they're going to feed a guy like Damian Harris. He's going to go off. Rashad Penny. I had to have an Eagles player in there. The dude has led the league in rushing yards per carry over the last 2 seasons. He's averaging 6.2 yards per carry over the last 2 years. He has over 1,000 rushing yards. That was in Seattle, and one of those years they had one of the worst lines in the league. He's joining a Philadelphia Eagles team that just released Miles Sanders. They let him go in free agency, who went to the Panthers, by the way. But I think look at what Miles Sanders was able to do last year. I think Rashad Penny is one of the most explosive running backs in the league, in my opinion. His ability to accelerate immediately is unbelievable. He looks like he got shot out of a gun. I look for him if he can stay healthy. That's always the thing with Rashad Penny. If he can stay healthy, I look at him putting up numbers just like Miles Sanders did this year. I see him putting up around 1,200, 1,300 yards. I see him getting 6 or 7 touchdowns on the ground. And he has receiving ability too. But the Eagles do like to give Kenneth Gainwell a lot of reps. So a little bit of committee there. But I think Rashad Penny, if they do not draft a running back, which I actually think they will, but as of right now, keep your eye on Rashad Penny. My very last one, this is going to be a hot take, but Brandon Cooks is coming to Dallas, and I think it's a huge signing. I think Brandon Cooks is capable of having a 1,000-yard season. I think he's going to fill the Amari Cooper role, kind of a guy who attacks underneath and medium distance routes. He's going to open up the entire offense for the Dallas Cowboys. I think Dak Prescott bounces back. I think CeeDee Lamb has an improved season. Michael Gallup is the guy that's going to take a hit here. But yeah, definitely Dak Prescott and Brandon Cooks. I think both of their values are going to go way up. I think that was the thing that the Cowboys missed last year. They need a guy who is a great route runner to open up things for the explosive receivers like CeeDee Lamb. And it's going to benefit the run game and Dak Prescott. The Cowboys are a Super Bowl contender next year. They were close this year, but I think Brandon Cooks, it seems, I don't know about you, but it feels like he's been in the league forever. The dude was getting 1,000-yard seasons with the Saints. That feels like an eternity ago. Then he goes to the Patriots. He just came back from the Texans, where he's been trapped for the last few years. But he comes back to a relevant team and a relevant offense, and therefore he will be relevant. I almost guarantee you he'll have 1,000 yards receiving this year. He won't get that many touchdowns, I don't think, but 1,000 yards receiving, fantasy relevance for sure.
So my first one is going to be Garrett Wilson, wide receiver for the Jets. I think that if they get Aaron Rodgers, his stock immediately bumps, his production bumps. He was the 21st ranked wide receiver last year in PPR leagues. I think that is definitely skyrocketing, possibly to top 5, but definitely top 10. My number 2, Jerry Jeudy. This is probably a shocker. But I remember when he got super angry during the Chiefs game and went off for like 3 touchdowns in the second half. I think that's what he's capable of. After Nathaniel Hackett left, that offense looked completely different and a lot more productive for the Broncos, especially Jerry Jeudy. I think he started to take off later in the year. I think that streak continues with Sean Payton. If they trade him, which is a possibility I've seen, that there are teams interested in trading for him. Depending on where he goes, I still think that his productivity increases. His career has kind of been not to where most people expected it to be, considering his Alabama career and how highly touted he was coming out of college and the route tactician that he is. But I think his career's trending upwards just from what I saw towards the end of last season. He was the 22nd ranked wide receiver. I definitely think he cracks the top 15, maybe the top 10 next season. And then number 3, Brees Hall. I think he bouts for the top fantasy running back this coming up season. I think Jonathan Taylor is going to have a bounce back year. We'll talk about him in a second. I know there's going to be some strong competition. Josh Jacobs will be in the running probably again. But I think Brees Hall, had he finished the season, he was definitely going to be a top 5 fantasy RB. He was the 33rd or 42nd ranked running back last year. That definitely was due partially to his injury and his season cut short. But I think next year he's going to receive a huge fantasy bump. If they get Aaron Rodgers, there's going to be I'm just going to see full on anxiety and panic attacks for NFL defenses when they go against the Jets if they have Aaron Rodgers, which means great things for Brees Hall and a lot easier time running the football when a defense has to worry about everyone else on the outside, and they can't just sit there and stack the box against you. Um,
I can verify how good he was last year because speaking of players on my fantasy team that get injured, Brees Hall, both of my leagues,
yeah,
he was a top 5 running back in the league fantasy wise before he went out. So could not agree more.
he was a fantastic ball player. Number 4, Jonathan Taylor. I think fantasy owners across the league and in every league was disappointed in Jonathan Taylor's performance last year. He was the 33rd ranked running back, and that's a really steep drop off from being the number 1 ranked player. Several people had him the number 1 ranked player in fantasy football. He was definitely one of the most targeted players in fantasy football last season. And he fell all the way to 33rd. I don't think he was completely healthy this year, and I don't think the Colts offensive line is what it's used to be in the past. But I do think he'll have a bounce back year this year. I definitely think he finishes as a top 10 fantasy running back, maybe top 5. He's definitely not going to be 33rd ranked coming into this season and finishing off the next fantasy season. This one is going to be in stark contrast to Dylan, and especially you'll see why. Because number 5, the fantasy player who I think will receive a boost next season is James Cook. I think with Devin Singletary leaving, even though they're bringing in Dameon Pierce, I think that James Cook, I think the organization loves this kid. He averaged 5.7 yards per carry last season. He didn't carry the ball a lot, but when he did, he made the most of it. And I think he had over 500 yards rushing by a hair, but it was still over 500 yards rushing on only like 89 attempts. That's insane. I think they want to give this kid the ball more. I think that he's going to be the starting running back coming into the season. And I think that, I think Dameon Pierce is going to eat into his touches. But James Cook was the
It's
40.
Damian Harris.
Yeah, Damian Harris. Damian Harris. Did I say Damian Williams?
Yeah. You said Damian
Oh,
Pierce
Damian
twice.
Pierce. My bad. That's the
The
Texans running
Texans,
back.
we're Texans fans.
Yeah,
Damian
different one.
Pierce is still on the Texans.
Damian Harris. Yeah, I think Damian Harris is going to cut into his touches, but I don't think that's going to matter as much because I think James Cook is going to keep hold of the starting running back position. He was the 44th ranked fantasy running back last year. I think that's definitely going to bump up probably to top 20, top 15. And I think that he's going to have a fantastic year. He can catch the football too. He had quite a few. I think he averaged almost 9 yards per catch. For a running back, that's excellent. That's almost a first down every time you catch the ball out of the backfield. And sometimes you're behind the line of scrimmage when you catch the ball. So I think he's just very productive. The limited sample size, I admit, and this is kind of a projection, but I think he's going to receive a strong fantasy bump next season.
I think James Cook is a receiver to keep your eye on as well. I think they can both be fantasy relevant. Yeah, I think it's in contrast. First of all, he's not going to be a starting running back because Damian Harris is going to go off. He's a physical runner. That's what the Bills have been lacking. Honestly, you look at what their offense has done the last few years. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss, they just haven't had those explosive runs, that physicality, running with an attitude. That's what Damon Harris is going to bring. I guarantee he's going to get the goal line touches. He's going to run the ball more, but PPR will make James Cook very relevant because that's where I think he's going to come in. I think his rushing yards going to stay about 500, but I think receiving is where he's about to see an uptick. I think you're going to see a guy get 40 to 50 catches this year, and another 500 yards receiving on the ground, which probably will put him close to probably RB20 in that range. I don't think he's going to get top 15, but PPR wise, yeah, I think he's pretty valuable, which we're going off PPR for all of these guys, by the way. But yeah, but Damian Harris, I think is about to have, I literally do I see close to 1,000, if not 1,000 yards and 15 touchdowns. That's what I see.
I don't know. He lost his job to Ramondre Stevens at the Patriots, and part of it was because
did he though?
He did, because Ramondre was more physical than him, and then I'm pretty sure took the goal line touches anyway. So I'm like, maybe he plays angry this year because he lost his job with the Patriots. They clearly didn't care to lose him. So I don't know. I can definitely see what you're saying. I think there's some validity to what you're saying as far as them being both fantasy relevant, but 15 touchdowns, like, geez, I don't see that happening. I don't.
Someone better get a hold of LT because that touchdown record is getting. No, I'm just kidding. That's not true. That's not true at all. And I take it back. But first of all, I'm gonna have a rebuttal for what you just said
All
because as great as Bill Belichick is, first of all, his drafting suspect at best. His whatever he does with the ground game, very suspect. He cannot stick with a running back ever. It's the hot hand thing. Damian Harris lost the running back position, gained it back, lost it, gained it back, and that's what happens when you play in Bill Belichick's offense. And that's why I recommend never drafting a Patriots offensive player, unless if it was Tom Brady, but he's gone because Bill Belichick doesn't know what to do when he's on offense. I feel like I don't know what it is. The revolving door. It seems like a running back. Receivers never steady anymore either. As great as a coach as he is, drafting and he is death to fantasy owners because it takes one fumble to get in Belichick's doghouse. And I'm not sure how you get out. I don't think anyone knows. But yeah, Bill. I'm not blaming Damian Harris for his steep decrease in production last year. That's a Belichick thing all day long. Damian Harris still looked good. I had him on my team for most of the season. I don't know where he finished at running back wise, but he was also dealing with injuries last year, which is why Ramondre Stevenson kept getting those opportunities in the first place. But he split carries with Stevenson. But yeah, Bill Belichick was the death to Damian Harris, not himself. And I think that he's about to have a monster year. But yeah, James Cook to me strikes me as like a slightly better version of J.D. McKissick, fantasy wise. That's right. McKissick's played well. That's not an insult. I think Cook has a better running ability than McKissick because he's bigger. But I don't think James is like Dalvin. Dalvin Cook is a much more elite runner than James Cook is. But they're both phenomenal receivers. So, yeah, I think both of them are going to see we're talking about players who are going to get a boost. The answer is obvious. Yes, both of them are about to get a boost. But the Bills, like I'm definitely, now that I'm talking this out loud, this is the best the Bills will be next year. If they can stay healthy, because this is what they've been needing is a run game. And I think they're about to inject a lot of energy into that run game. But yeah, so there you go. We are already, it is March 20th at the time of this recording, and we are already talking about NFL fantasy, which is 5 months away or more. So get ready. It'll be here before you know it. This is just the beginning. We're going to definitely talk more fantasy coming up. The draft is next month. We're excited about that. But yeah, thank you for joining us here on Dueker Sports. As always, I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we will be back next week.